to the cloud. And I think we are on the record now. Tondini, Austin, greetings to both of you. And we'll wait another minute or so before we get going. By way of announcement, without wanting to overburden you too much, I put another homework assignment on the in the assignments in Carmen that's due on Monday. I guess I think it's fair to say you shouldn't spend more than an hour on it. I think it's actually about the same degree of difficulty, if we can use that term, as the problem that you did for today that we'll talk about. But but it's due on Monday, so you have plenty of time to look at it, and I don't think you'll be puzzling over it too much. I don't think it involves one of my other favorite languages, the one that I don't know very well at all, and that's Cree, which I talked about a little bit earlier in the semester when I showed you the Canadian Indigenous syllabic writing system that I had on my T-shirt of, and that crops up occasionally in our has cropped up occasionally in our discussion or mention of Algonquian languages. So now we have a few others with us. Jean-Yi, Isabel, Claire, and Marcia. Excellent. So I think we're just about all set, all ready to go. So I will start by doing my usual striptease. Let me share my screen to make things a little easier for you to see. And I have here my T-shirt du jour. Can't quite see it, I think. There you go. And I will put it on, where is it? Oh, maybe I never downloaded the T-shirt picture. Give me a sec here. There, nope, that's yesterday's. Oh, well, okay. I hope you can see it because it says Joseph University, and there's a reason. Oh, here it is. Yeah, there you go. Joseph University. There really is no Joseph University. This was a T-shirt that I think my sister had made and sent to me just for fun. But it allows me to talk to you about some details of the history of linguistics that I think are worth sharing with you. There we go. So as you all know, from listening to me for the last 12 weeks or so, my shtick, if you want to call it that, in historical linguistics, which is my view of things, or what we could call my school of thought, hence the Joseph University, is these two things more than anything, these two notions more than anything: regularity of sound change and analogy. You could have guessed regularity of sound change, of course, because I mention it almost every class day that we have. But analogy, we've been working on it the last couple of days, and there'll be more on it today. And it's maybe have not given it the complete attention that it deserves, but it's there. We did mention it on day one, remember, with Mendenhall. This sort of two-pronged approach to historical linguistics and to understanding language change is based on the work of the so-called neo-grammarian school of historical linguistics. These are 19th century, sort of mid 19th century, mid to late 19th century, mostly German or German speaking, but not exclusively so, Central European linguists. Several of them were centered in Leipzig, which is a sort of a city of considerable culture and history in the eastern part of Europe, but not just there. And they were all Indo-Europeanists, very influential. And the neo-grammarian linguistics really got the field of linguistics off in the direction of a predictive science. So the fact that we talk about linguistics as the science of language, or the scientific approach to language, really owes a lot to the neo-grammarians. Others as well, but the neo-grammarians kind of got linguistics on this predictive scientific footing by focusing on the kinds of things that we've been focusing on: regular sound correspondences between related languages and the regular sound changes that gave rise to them, and analogy. I should probably add this, and analogy as a basis for understanding sound correspondences, or yes, exceptions to sound correspondence. That's the way of putting it. To regular sound correspondences, as we did with, as we saw with our what we started with, the Gathu and Gatu and Gathwa example from Old Persian. But it's not the case that everyone agrees with me or with the neo-grammarians. There are those, and this is new material, but it's for you. But it's actually I had under the neo-grammarians, I actually had photos of some of these guys. This is sort of the dean, if you will, of neo-grammarian linguistics, Karl Brugmann. These are all, I realize they're all sort of dead white guys, but they were very influential scholars, and we have to, I think, give them credit where credit is due for the really remarkable discoveries that they made. Brugmann, together with this fellow Hermann Osthoff, and a third very important figure, Karl Berner. He only, you can't see his dates very well. He was 1846 to 1896, so he didn't live very long. But these guys and others these are sort of the core of neo-grammarian linguistics as it developed in the 19th century and gave us the basis for what we do in historical linguistics today, at least the way I practice it. But as I said, not everyone agrees with me about regular sound change and the role of analogy and such. There are those who advocate for what's called lexical diffusion, which says that sound change is not realized in all relevant words at the same time, which is what's claimed by regularity. Remember our definition of regularity from early on, that the same sound change will happen in the same environment within a given period of time and a given space. So the lexical diffusionists say that sound change rather works its way through the lexicon, essentially one word at a time, so that in this way, sound change is not phonetically determined, something that we focused on in this class following in the neo-grammarian view of things, but rather it's lexically determined. And my counter to that is, so what starts the sound change off in the first place? What motivates it from the very beginning? I think without something like phonetics as giving us a starting point, without grounding our understanding of sound change in phonetics and maybe a very specific environment, we really don't have an understanding for why things get started at all. And so if we remember, if we think of the of phonetics and think of a sound change starting in a phonetic environment, but maybe a very specific one. And if you recall what we talked about last time, that is phonically based analogy, that was the example of academia based on the phonic similarity with macadamia as a pronunciation, a variant pronunciation of academia. Phonetics gives us the starting point, and phonically based analogy gives us the spread to environments in other words. So that's how I counter the lexical diffusionist view of sound change. And in this way, I am consistent with, or sticking to, my neo-grammarian guns, so to speak. There are also those who say, they're not necessarily the same as the lexical diffusionists, so that's a different school of thought, that say that there's no such thing as analogy as a mechanism of change. Rather, they see analogy as the byproduct of changes in the rules that create the forms. So instead of analogy being the driving force, changes in the rule system that creates forms, creates surface forms, that's what they say is responsible for the analogical effect. So to illustrate what I mean by that, to look at our case of Greek, the word for one, nominative hen, and the genitive hemos, this reconciling this difference synchronically between the n of the nominative and the m of the genitive, we could have an underlying form hem as the starting point for both the nominative and the genitive, and then a synchronic rule that takes a final m into and turns it into an n, and that gives the nominative hen. So this is drawing on the variation or the allomorphy between the nominative hen and the genitive form with an m, hem. In this approach, they would say that what gives the analogical or the leveling effect in the later stage, where we have a hen generalized throughout the paradigm, is really the generalization of the environment for the rule. So the rule changes, and that has the effect, it's claimed, of changing the forms that we actually find. So in stage one, then, just to sort of sketch it out, we would start with an underlying form, a basic form hem in the nominative and hemos in the genitive. The m to n in final position rule would turn hem into hen, giving us this form, this surface form, and I put the surface form in square brackets, the underlying form in the slashes. And in the genitive, the m is unaffected. Nothing happens to it because it doesn't meet the environment for the rule. This m is in the middle of the word, not at the end of the word. In stage two, the rule has changed and generalized. Instead of being in final position, let's say after a vowel, I guess maybe I should put that in, make it a little clearer what's going on. Instead of in final position after a vowel, it's simply after a vowel. And so that it would apply in the case of hem and give us the form hen, and it would also apply in the case of hemos and give us the form henos. So this, what we talked about yesterday, or the last class, or the time before, as a leveling effect, where the m versus n, or the n versus m difference is leveled out in favor of n. In this approach, it would be not a matter of analogy or leveling, but rather a case of the change in the rules leading to these different forms. So how do I counter that? Well, I say, so what my counter argument, or my counter point to this kind of approach is, so what motivates the change in the rule? Why would this rule change? Is it just a matter of sort of random random effects in the change? You can generalize this from vowel after vowel in final position to just after vowel in general. But why would you do that? Especially since, if you may remember, I mentioned that there are note that there are m's in medial position. So there was a word that actually was the same pronunciation, meaning garment, and not the genitive, but and this m is unaffected. So what motivates my counter to this is then what motivates the change in the rule. And if the leveling that you get, this henos, if that leveling effect is just an accidental byproduct of the rule change, then why does it turn out, and we see this in case after case after case, why does it always go in the direction of smoothing out the allomorphy? And that's, I think, a serious problem. And moreover, how do we explain exceptional cases like hemos? And what about cases that are not affected? So what you're getting in class, all of this is by way of saying that what I'm teaching you is my particular take on things, and hence I talk about Joseph University. And what you're getting in this class is really the Joseph School of historical linguistics, if you will. I mean, that's a bit grandiose, and I don't really mean to say that I'm anywhere in the same league as the neo-grammarians that we talked about. But what I am giving you is sort of a form of neo-grammarianism, and it's not the views that I express are not necessarily believed by all practicing historical linguists, but I think they're right, and that's my my reason for imparting that wisdom to you. So all that by way of giving you a bit of history, but also a bit more topical subject matter that I might not have covered anyway. This business about lexical diffusion and this approach that says there's no such thing as analogy. It's really just changes in rules and rule systems. I think we can, that there are good reasons for rejecting both of those, and that's why I teach you what I teach you. And it's interesting because the neo-grammarians seem to have, I think, at least got it right 150 or so years ago. And there's been all this debate since then about whether they really were, whether sound change really is regular, whether analogy really does exist, and so forth. And I think it does. And I think that for whatever reason, they actually had the right insight. Their vision of what happens in language change was remarkably clear. Even if I'm not convinced that they always understood completely why things worked the way they did, but they did understand the way they worked. So anyway, so that's the t-shirt du jour and the story that goes with it. Yeah, Kyle, question.
So does that mean that you, I guess not you specifically, but I guess people in the neo-grammarian school are trying to also say that things like dissimilation, like in Latin, the RL changes, are those also regular?
Well, there is a class of sound changes, or there are various sound changes that seem to be just sporadic by nature, and what you just referred to, dissimilation, is one of them. But I think that in many instances in dissimilation, you can identify a phonetic starting point. So in the case of the Latin, R becoming L in, let me see, wait a minute, it's, yeah, it's usually in the environment of either an R somewhere in the word or an L somewhere else in the word, so that there's the phonetic drive, or the driving phonetic motivation has to do with sort of relieving the issue of pronouncing the same sound in or the same feature in a sound in successive syllables or next to one another or the like. I did say that most sound changes that we identify and that we talk about are assimilations, assimilatory in nature, involving the sounds becoming more alike. But sometimes combinations of sounds produce either articulatory issues, like doing too many rhotic-like sounds or liquid-like sounds together, or sometimes there's an acoustic issue that you're not quite sure what you're hearing, and you attribute the quality to one of the two sounds and not to the other. With regard to the articulatory issue, I think we mentioned this in the Hawk and Joseph textbook. This is a word, rural, that poses a lot of issues for pronunciation, and there are many people who will pronounce it as something like rural, without, so that would be a sort of dissimilatory loss of the R. There's also, I will find it for you and circulate it, but there was a skit from this TV show called 30 Rock, I think. Did any of you ever watch that?
Yes.
It was a sitcom comedy kind of thing, and they have a yes. The rural yeah, it poses problems not just for non-native speakers but also for native speakers. But they had an episode that focused around a film or documentary or something that they were going to do that was called the rural juror. And the issue was no one could understand when one of the characters, like the woman with the blonde hair who had a bit of a speech affectation, I think, if I remember right, and she couldn't, no one could understand what she was saying when she said rural juror. And if you try to say it, you'll see you just get your tongue gets sort of too tied up with all of these. Let me see, I should be able to find. Let me see. Give me a second. I'll see if I can find it for you, because it was kind of amusing, and it makes I wasn't thinking that we would get off into dissimulation, but rural juror. 30 Rock rural juror. Okay. Are you? Oh, I have to. I'm going to stop sharing and then restart sharing with the sound. So because sound is important here. Share sound. Okay, so let's see if we can hear the rural juror. It's only 2 minutes and 47 seconds, so maybe we can actually. Why is this not working? There we go.
Hi, I'm Kat Graham,
Okay.
a Goodwill Ambassador for the UN Refugee
A
Agency.
very important.
Did you know that over 60,000...
But, okay, here we go.
Hey, I gotta miss an hour of rehearsal today because I just found out from my publicist I've been booked on The View.
So are you all able to hear that? Should I turn it up? Okay. I don't know how to get rid of this thing here. No, thanks. There we go. Okay, and I can go full screen. All right.
Okay. No.
What did I just do wrong here? All right.
Could it be Roar, her gem?
No, I'm sorry. Let's go back. I think I skipped ahead by accident.
The Roar Juror has a limited release next week.
Okay.
J-Train,
No,
as
wait.
you may know.
There we go. Okay, back to neo-grammarianism. So yeah, so I hope you enjoyed that little interlude. So back to Kyle. So there are dissimilatory changes that can have a phonetic basis. Whether they're regular or not depends on how detailed you make the environment. And in a case like the loss of the R in rural, or however it's pronounced, it was Barbara Walters that they were making fun of with that, which, okay, we don't have to endorse their mockery, but it was in the interest of comedy. And in any case, Barbara Walters did not hide her speech impediment at all, so but rather owned it, which I think is to her credit. So yeah, so depending on how detailed you make the environment, you can get dissimilatory changes that are regular, even if they seem to be sort of focused on individual lexical items. So I don't know if that's a very, very long answer, I realize, to your question, Kyle, but I hope, do I have you all with me still? Yeah. Let's see. Yes, I guess I do. Good. So if that gives you an idea of what the an answer to your question might look like, Kyle. I hope that's satisfactory, and I think you gave a thumbs up, so that's good. Okay, so that's more than I had intended to spend on the school, but that's fine. It gives us all a chance for a change of pace, which is always good. So I will now close this off and start back with my one of my favorite shticks, namely analogy, and we will go from there. Let me just find it here. You always get these glimpses of how cluttered my desktop is. Here we go. Analogy slides. Good. Okay. So back to analogy. We had gotten as far as, we've gotten through a fair bit here, right? We've gotten through academia, and we ended, I think, by talking about the properties of analogy. These are very important, and these fall out from this sort of neo-grammarian dichotomy between sound change and analogy, not phonetically natural. So sound change is phonetically natural if it's phonetically driven, but it's blind. It doesn't involve other factors. It doesn't worry about whether it's a noun or a verb or anything of that sort. Analogy, however, can be very focused on particular non-phonetic aspects like grammatical type, even frequency can matter. Analogy is sporadic in its application versus regularity for sound change. So all of these sort of go together, and we allows this view of sound change as phonetically driven, regular kind of event that gives us a basis for distinguishing between that kind of change and other types of change like analogy. And we saw these properties in the examples of analogy that we had talked about so far. Interestingly, and you may have gotten a hint of this when we talked about the Latin S and R alternation, and even for the Greek case, analogy forms a kind of cycle with sound change in that conditioned sound changes cause the allomorphy, that is to say, the differences in the shapes of particular realizations of a single morpheme. Conditioned sound changes give rise to the allomorphy within paradigms that analogy can then level out. So in the case of honos and honoris from Latin, we just looked at this column here and the third column over here, but the starting point, as I guess I hinted at, but the starting point had an S throughout the paradigm. So it was honos, honosis, honosem, and a sound change of S to R intervocalically, which has no exceptions, and so it fits the bill as a regular sound change, or no exceptions that cannot be explained by reference to analogy or borrowing, for instance. And it's phonetically driven in that we have the voicing between vowels. Probably this went through a stage of S to Z to R, actually. So that particularly if we think of, remember several weeks ago, we suggested that maybe sound change operates one feature at a time. So it would be changing the voicing here and then changing the type of release from the fricative to the liquid kind of release here. So this sound change of S to Z to R intervocalically gave rise to this alternation, these different allomorphs, allomorph in S and an allomorph in R. An analogy then leveled that out and gave us the R throughout. Similarly, with regard to Greek, the stage where we have nominative hen and a genitive hemos is what came about by a sound change operating on a paradigm that was uniform, that had the M throughout the paradigm, and the sound change had took the M and turned it into an N in final position. And the motivation there, the phonetic motivation there, probably has to do with the degree of contrast that that languages tolerate in certain positions, like word finality. And then analogy sets in. So we have a kind of cycle whereby we started with a uniform paradigm, the same morpheme, S in the case of the Latin and M in the case of Greek, was affected by sound change, a conditioned sound change that gave rise to allomorphy, to two different forms of the same word, S, R in the case of the Latin and N, M in the case of the Greek. And then analogy sets in, leveling. And what is the effect of the analogy? Well, it sort of returns things to a uniform paradigm. The uniformity is there throughout the paradigm, but of a different sort. It's the R that it's uniform with regard to an R throughout the paradigm, uniform with regard to an N throughout the paradigm, whereas earlier it was an S, uniformity with the S form and uniformity with the M. So So what we have in a sense then is analogy giving a regularity to the paradigm, that is a uniformity to the paradigm that had been destroyed, that had been an earlier state that had been destroyed by the effects of a conditioned sound change. This sort of cyclic interaction of sound change and leveling gave rise to a statement by a linguist named Edgar Sturtevant, who was a very prominent historical linguist, American historical linguist, who taught at Yale for years and years in the first half of the 20th century. It's referred to in the literature as Sturtevant's paradox, because he said, he stated it this way, and it's important to pay attention to how he states it. Sound change is regular but produces irregularity, whereas analogy is irregular but produces regularity. So that sounds like a paradox as the way it's stated there. But what's really at issue is we have to think about what Sturtevant means here by regular, regularity, irregular, irregularity. Would anyone like to take a stab at trying to sort of deconstruct Sturtevant's paradox according to how is he using the term regular and regularity and irregularity in this statement? Does anyone see what and how does, and then we can think about how that compares with the with what we've been saying. I see that Kenna has raised her hand, so please.
Yeah, I'll give
enlighten
it a
us.
shot.
Go for it.
Okay. So he's saying that sound change is like common and it produces like irregular forms, but analogy can strike almost at any time, but it produces forms that are regular, I guess.
And what was
Yeah,
it?
stuck with that one.
Yeah, no, that's good. Anyone want to amplify on that a bit? That's essentially right. So yeah, Rebecca, what do you have to say?
Yeah, I think the first part where sound change is regular and analogy is irregular is like with regard to phonetic motivation and application to all of the relevant like phonetic environments. But the second part where sound change produces irregularity and analogy produces regularity applies more to the morphological side of it.
Yeah, good.
Or maybe in terms of sound change, just the number of contrasts in a language in general, if they
no, that's
get a new phoneme.
Yeah, no, that's a good way of putting it. Both of you have really sort of hit the nail on the head, so to speak. And what did we use instead? So when he says analogy is irregular, what was the term that we used with regard to the application of analogy? Do you remember? And when we talked about sound change being regular, I said that I remember specifically asking, what is the opposite of regular with regard to sound change, the application of sound change? Rebecca, do you remember?
Sporadic.
Sporadic, right? That was the term that we used. So and instead of the regularity that's produced by analogy, when we look at this and we say, sure, this is a regular paradigm. There are no bumps or whatever in it. The term that I used in talking about this was uniformity, a uniform paradigm. So that if we replace Sturtevant's paradox with sound change is regular, but produces non-uniform paradigms, whereas analogy is sporadic, but produces uniform paradigms, it doesn't have the same clout. It doesn't have the same bite, if you will, as an interesting statement about language change. But that's really what it means. So it's kind of a play on words in a sense, regular, irregular, and so forth. But if we substitute the terms that we've been using in the class more regularly, then we would say sound change is regular in the neo-grammarian sense, but produces non-uniformity in paradigms, whereas analogy is sporadic, but produces uniformity within paradigms. Then it's sort of less clever, but it encapsulates better what we've been working towards understanding, at least. Okay, everyone okay with that? You see what's going on there? Good. Okay. let's move on then to what's next. So this is also an aspect that is sort of my shtick, my particular view on analogy that I've developed with especially with a colleague of mine who used to teach here, but named let me put his name in the text box. Richard Jonda. And he and I have written a number of things where we argue that analogy needs to be understood as a local, what we would refer to as a local generalization, and I'll explain what we mean by that. In most instances of analogy, we have a word or word form being pulled in the direction of another. Remember, I talked about analogy as kind of as something we could think of as morphological assimilation, but in sort of bringing two forms together, like the hem and hen, and bringing them together to the form hen, or the honos and honor of Latin, being pulled in the direction of the nominative, being pulled in the direction of the genitive and accusative forms, giving honor everywhere. It often involves the severing or weakening of formal ties with other apparently related items. Remember when I talked about memento becoming momento, I said, what about the connection with words like memory or remember? So pulling a word in one direction analogically is often going to be pulling it away from another related form. This is true even in the very frequent situation, I say, where analogy affects paradigmatically related forms. This is what we've looked at mainly so far, paradigm leveling. But what we find is that oftentimes the forms within a paradigm are affected analogically, leveled out, but there are derivationally related forms, that is, forms that are still related, but not as tightly grammatically related as the forms within a paradigm, or those are left alone. So there was a stage in early Greek, of course, Greek, where the same NM alternation that we see in the word that we saw in the word for one, it was also there in the word for earth, kthon in the nominative, kthomos with an M in the genitive and the dative case. And this was leveled out, just like in the word for one, was leveled out in favor of the nominative, giving an N throughout the paradigm, a uniform paradigm with N everywhere. But there were derived, there we go. There were derived adjective. There's a derived adjective meaning belonging to the earth that had the form ktamalos with an M. There was a derived adverbial form, chamai, meaning on the ground. And even when the forms within the paradigm were leveled out to N everywhere, the adjective remained as ktamalos with an M and kamai or chamai with an M. So the paradigmatically related forms were leveled out, but the forms which were not paradigmatically related to the stem kthom, they did not undergo analogical reformation. They retained their M. So Rich Jonda and I use this to argue that the MN alternation was resolved locally within the paradigm, but from a sort of more global perspective, it led to a complication in the overall grammar because of the formal relationship between the noun and the derived adjective and adverbial, where that relationship was disturbed. When there was an M in the paradigm here, then having an M in the related adjective and the related adverb could be understood, could be motivated. But once the N is generalized in the paradigm, then this M becomes somewhat anomalous, but it's there nonetheless. So we sort of see this as kind of like a push-pull between, not necessarily between the effects of sound change, the effects of analogy, though that's certainly, the way Sturtevant puts it, that's certainly the case. But there's sort of a push and pull relationship between the set of related forms that a word enters into. And what we argue ultimately is that a lot of what speakers do is very local in nature. We as linguists are sort of in the envious position of being able to sort of look through dictionaries and find odd words and say, oh, there's a connection here, there's a connection there, and so forth. But speakers, we think, live very much in the moment, and much of what we do is very localized in nature, saying, oh, I'm trying to say something, I need to get it out. I don't need to search through all 300,000 words of the English lexicon to find the right word. I can just grab this one and run with it, basically. So that's what we mean by saying that what speakers do is very local in nature. It doesn't range over the whole of the language. Speakers can provide or create solutions to problems posed by relatedness between morphemes, various phonological alternations, but they resolve them, or they deal with them on a very local basis. Speakers make generalizations, but not over vast amounts of data that's oftentimes very obscure and not very frequent. The linguist has the leisure to say, oh, well, there's this word, there's this word, there's this word. We can tie these all together and look, isn't this a nice bundle that we have? Now, again and again, we argue there are what we find is local generalizations that lead to sort of an economy on a very small scale for a limited set of data, even at the expense of complications in terms of relations with other sets of data. So that's what I was suggesting here with if we think of the M-N alternation here as sort of a local problem, why do we have N? Why do we have M? Why don't we just have the same form throughout? Which is what we find in a number of other nouns in Greek, for instance, those that end in an R. You find the R throughout the paradigm. So why should M and N be different? Basically, that's the sort of localized problem. And the solution that speakers, at this point, you might say, well, at least the M makes some sense because we have the derived adjective with an M and the derived adverb with an M. But the more immediate problem, the more sort of localized problem is these very tightly related forms within the paradigm. And speakers solve that problem at the expense of creating another problem with the M in derived forms versus the N in the basic starting point, the noun form that is the basis for the adjective and the adverb. So that's what we mean by the sort of push and pull between, you get economy on a small scale, say within the paradigm, but a complication at the level of dealing with the relationship between the base noun and the derived adjective and adverb. Let me give some examples here that I hope will make this clear, dealing with English, among my favorite languages, but one that I sometimes take for granted. So we talked about memento, so let's look at that one first. Memento moves in the direction of moment, giving the pronunciation momento with an O that you can hear if you keep your ears tuned for that. But this movement in the direction of moment gives a generalization of sorts over a sort of small subclass, namely the nouns in moment. So we have both moment and momento, but that which we used last time as an example of sort of phonically based or sound-based analogy, what we call here phonic attraction, that phonic attraction creates this subclass of nouns in moment, namely the word moment and the noun momento, which now seems to be clustering with it. But in doing that, it pulls memento away from apparently related forms like memory or remember. So overall, we have a complication, even if there's a sort of localized simplification of memento becoming momento, giving us this small class of nouns, moment and momento. We can see it also with the word, the syntax of the word different. We haven't talked a lot about syntax in this class, and we won't, unfortunately. There just isn't time for it, but we can nonetheless, this will give us a little bit of a taste of syntactic change. So the earlier, this has to do with what kind of preposition follows different. So the older syntax of different uses different from instead of, and I think maybe, I don't know if that's my usage, and I don't know if there are any of you can think about your own usage and see what you say there. But what what you hear a lot now, and I would venture to say that most of you, being younger speakers, are probably of this sort. You use than instead of from. So different than, he is different than his brother, where I would say he is different from his brother. And I don't know if any of you are different from speakers. As I say, my guess is that you're all different than speakers. But in any case, you're aware of this distinction? You know, there are speakers like me who say different from, and there are others who, typically younger speakers now, who say different than. Is that a fact about English that you all will recognize? Yeah.
I've never heard anyone say different from.
Okay. Well, now you have. I just said it. And yeah, and that's my usage. But you're a different than speaker than Kyle. And Kenna, I
Yes.
see you reacted with
Yeah.
surprise, or
Because I would say, I don't know, it's much different than this subject. Or I don't know. I feel like I've said different from before, or like he's different from the rest, like that.
okay. All right. So maybe I didn't mean to accuse all younger speakers of being different
Yeah.
different than speakers, but in my experience is that it's mainly older speakers like me who say different from. So that's the older syntax. How do we make sense of this? Let's call it the syntactic innovation of using than. Well, it seems to be that the different is taking on the syntax of a comparative, because like better than. John is better than his brother at tennis or whatever, where than is the usual preposition that's used after a comparative. Now, what is it that might motivate different taking on the syntax of a comparative? Different is not a comparative form. Doesn't have an ER. It doesn't. But is there something about the semantics of different that might align it with a comparative? Can you understand the motivation for that? It's really a type of analogical change in syntax. Does anyone see what's going on there? Different from becoming, taking on the syntax of a comparative, different than.
Different is kind of working comparatively.
Exactly. Yeah. Different is very much, in terms of its semantics, it's very much a comparative notion, because you're drawing a relationship between two entities and trying to make sense of the ways in which they're similar or dissimilar. That's what different is about. So it's semantically it's comparative, and what we find is that it takes on the syntax of a comparative in this usage with different than. But notice that in doing so with different moving in the direction of the comparative, it's actually then being pulled away from its a verb that seems to be related to it, namely the verb to differ. In that, I am pretty sure that speakers who say different than do not say that he differs than his brother, but you would say he differs from his brother. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think I've ever actually heard anyone say, and differ, I realize, is not as common, not as frequent as different, but the syntax of the verb differ is still uses from as the preposition with it, and not than. At least, as I say, I've never heard differ as the verb followed by than. Is you different than speakers out there, how do you feel about John differs than his brother? No good, right? Yeah, thank you. Oscar. And does anyone like it? It's okay if you do like it. Kenneth says no. No, Rebecca. All right, good. So my intuitions or my ears have not deceived me in this. But notice what this means is that different. So at one stage we have differ and different, just sort of tightly connected to one another with the same syntax. John is different from his brother. John differs from his brother. Different, the adjective moves in the direction of the comparative. So we now say John is better than his brother. John is different than his brother, or many of you say that. But that leaves differ sort of separated off from different. So there's a sort of local solution to what to do about the syntax of different, but that local solution may resolve the choice of preposition with a comparative like adjective, different than, better than, but it pulls it away from the this apparently related verb differ, which has now a different kind of syntax from the adjective. So what at one point, or for speakers like me, you could make a generalization over the syntax of the morpheme differ. Whether it's a verb or a noun or an adjective, you get the than used as the preposition with it. In the case of the speakers like you guys who said different than but differ from, there's no generalization to be made over the syntax of the morpheme differ, but there is a generalization to be made over comparative adjectives that are comparative in their semantics. That's what I mean by talking about this sort of push and pull analogy. As a local generalization, it pulls things together, but at the same time can pull them apart from forms that they had been related to. And what Jonda and I argue is that this is really the just the way of the world with language, that speakers are more focused on smaller sets of data than they are on larger sets of data. Linguists love to sort of revel in large sets of data and pull up obscure forms that show that this word is related and such. But for the speaker, sort of living in the here and now, living in the present. You remember that lecture I gave some weeks ago, I think towards the end of February, where I talked about the extended present, and I used the example of the traffic signs that change, and it tells you traffic signal has changed. And I remember my point there was that that's an interesting observation or an interesting point of information, but it's relevant only if you've been to that intersection before. If this is your first time at the intersection, it doesn't matter whether it's changed or not. All you see, all you focus on is the here and now. So I use that as a way of suggesting that speakers in general are focused on the here and now. They can expand their ken, so to speak, temporally somewhat, but mostly our attention is on the here and now. We live in the present moment, so to speak. And there are other forms that are other instances of local generalizations that are like that. So this word nuclear, which is how I pronounce it, has moved in the direction for many speakers. And this started as far back as the 1950s when President Eisenhower was talking about in the aftermath of the use of the atomic bombs at the end of World War II, the energy that was produced by splitting the atom came into the fore. And Eisenhower, and probably not necessarily people following him, but just it was a common pronunciation. Eisenhower and many others since, I think almost, to be honest, almost every president since Eisenhower says nuclear instead of nuclear. And that moves it in the direction of adjectives like popular, that is, so this pronunciation nuclear with this euler, there's a generalization over this ending adjectives with this class, but that pulls nuclear away from its base word nucleus. So nucleus and nuclear form a sort of tight little group, but then nuclear gets pulled in the direction of adjectives like popular or jugular there are others as well, but there's a couple there. And that leaves nucleus kind of out in the cold, so to speak. But nuclear, that pronunciation, and popular and jugular and other adjectives like that then form a cluster of adjectives in the Euler. So we have this sort of local resolution of this adjective ending in leer that is remade into Euler based on analogy with forms like popular, jugular, and such. But that pulls it away from nucleus. Nucleus is left, as I say, sort of left out in the cold. My understanding, I haven't heard this myself, but I've been told that there are some speakers who say for the noun form, they say nucleus. That would be sort of restoring the the relationship between the noun and the derived adjective. So if you have nucleus, nuclear, there's an anomaly there. If you remake the noun based on the adjective, then you have nucleus, nuclear. I'm sorry, I can't say them because these aren't my native pronunciations. But so if you have nucleus and nuclear, then you're reestablishing that relationship and maintaining the relationship of the adjective with the class of forms like popular and jugular and so forth. So again, we see this sort of push and pull, and not everything that goes on. Remember, not everything that affects the sounds, so the pronunciations of words is due to sound change. The analogy can bring about changes in the forms of words as well. That was a lesson that we learned last time, and that's why I drew this distinction between sound change proper, or now based on my introduction about the neo-grammarians, you might understand why I talk about it as sound change in the neo-grammarian sense, because the regularity and the phoneticity of sound change was something that the neo-grammarians, that as a school of historical linguists and linguistics, really focused on. And that's, as I say, that's what I've been imparting to you, because this is how I share their vision of what goes on in language change. There are others as well, but I won't dwell on it on them. But you can. I'll put these notes on in Carmen, and you can, if you want to look through them, you can. Since we've talked some about about semantics, it's hang on just a second. Since we've talked about semantics, let me and semantic change, let me give you two examples of phonically based shifts in semantics, I think. So the word flaunt historically means to show off or to display ostentatiously, and it's now quite commonly used from a prescriptive standpoint. It's used incorrectly, but we won't get into that, but just quite commonly used in the sense of to show contempt for or to scorn. And in that way, it's become assimilated in meaning to the phonically similar word flout, which does mean to show contempt for. So if you flout, if you don't pay attention to parking signs or no parking signs or whatever, you're flouting the law. But people will say that he is flaunting the law, which from an etymological standpoint doesn't make any sense. And what seems to be the case here is that they share the phonic shell of an FL initially and a final T, and that phonic link has brought the word, the meaning of flout being imposed on the form flaunt. So if there used to be an ad for, gosh, I can't remember what it was, but the tagline for the ad was, if you've got it, flaunt it. That is, if you have it, whatever the it might be, you should show it off, be proud of it, display it ostentatiously. But for speakers for whom these words are synonymous now, show would say if you've got it, flout it, or something, which really wouldn't make much sense. We see this also in the word diffident, which in terms of its etymology again means something like shy or lacking in confidence, sort of being without fides, being without faithfulness, if you will. And it's now used by some speakers in the meaning of having no interest in something or having no concern for. And I think what's going on here is that it's been attracted by the phonically similar word indifferent, which means, again, etymologically means having no interest in some. So if you're indifferent to someone's plight, then you have no interest in their plight. And here they both share the the morpheme diff, and that probably is the basis for a shift in the meaning of diffident from lacking in self-confidence to having no interest. So it's assimilating based on the similarity in sound. It's assimilating in meaning to indifferent. I will mention something, this phonic attraction that my younger son did when he was 3. He had a regular suppression of syllable initial L. So for him, the adult word molasses, which he heard because we would use molasses with pancakes or the like, for him was moasses. So syllable initial L was suppressed when he was 3. Interestingly, for the word elastic, what he did was not just suppress the L, but he added the mo as well. So for him at that age, elastic was moastic. And even the word lasso, which he did hear because it was something that we would come up in stories about cowboys or the Wild West or whatever. For him, came out, he suppressed the L, but that mo was sort of carried over from moasses and moastic, and he produced moassu, like that. So for him, there was a phonically based generalization about words that had mo, or that had an L and an A and an S, and based on his moasses, he extended that to other words that weren't really related semantically, but instead had a phonic link, moasses, moastic, and moassu. So I will tell him tonight that a good thing he's not here. He'd be embarrassed, of course, but I think it's, when he did it, I thought, oh, this is amazing. This is too good to be true. But he did it nonetheless. So let's see. I have about, yeah, I can squeeze some of this stuff in. So once we recognize that there can be this phonic side to analogical connections, I'm kind of giving you a number of different related topics having to do with analogy, but this, after talking about the interaction of analogy and sound change, I'm now moving back to this phonically based kind of analogy that we talked about with regard to academia last time. So there are a number of words in English that have the ending ag. I probably should have written this with the a sign, but and their meanings seem to be somehow related to slowness or fatigue or tedious action and the like. So there's drag, for instance, meaning to lag behind. These are all etymologically from a source with a G, except, as we'll see, for sag. So the word drag, I'm dragging today, meaning I'm tired today. The word fag in the sense of exhaust or grow weary, meaning it coming from an earlier English faga, meaning to droop. The word flag, meaning to hang limply or droop. Again, it has to do with I'm flagging today. It's the end of the day. I've had a busy day, and I'm dragging. I'm flagging. All of these are things that we can say. And then lag itself from meaning to fail to keep up, so to be slow or slower than others, from an early English lag, meaning last person. And then there's the word sag, meaning to sink or droop, like the a chair or a chair, a cushion. You sit in it and you kind of sag down. So there's sort of a slowness or tedious kind of notion in there. And all of these drag, fag, flag, and lag all come from earlier forms with a G, either directly, either from Old English as an inherited form, or in the case of flag, maybe as a borrowing from Old Norse into, or from Norse into English. And then there's sag, which seems to fit semantically with these and fits in terms of its form, having the a and the g. But an earlier, even though it does come from Middle English sagen with a g, there are some attested forms of this word that have a k, saka, and it's in origin it seems to come from the Swedish verb saka, meaning to sink, which is actually ultimately related to English sink. So these all have a G etymologically, but sag has a K etymologically. So how did it get its G? The answer is that if we allow for phonically based analogy and also allow for the semantics, semantically based analogy, then we can say that this class of four semantically and phonically related words sort of drew this semantically related word into their orbit. It's like from the Star Wars tractor beams that will pull an enemy ship into the sphere of influence of one of the ships, spaceships. So these acted like a tractor beam pulling a sack with a K into their orbit. And in order to be a full-fledged and well sort of well-respected member of this class, sack with a K would have to change to sag with a G. So we can use this notion of phonic attraction and also the semantic basis for analogy as a way of solving this otherwise etymologically puzzling development. And I'll skip the Armenian case and let me see what another example, just to show that it isn't just English, but this is an example from Quechua. You guys have a bit of experience with Quechua from from the problem set number 1. Bruce Mannheim, who is one of the leading anthropological linguists and a specialist in Quechua and the language of the ancient Inca. And some of you, I think, are taking the Spanish course with Anna Babel in the Spanish department. She was a student of Bruce Mannheim's. So you are part of if you're taking that course, you're part of the academic lineage that includes this fellow here, Bruce. And he points out that from a synchronic point of view, glottalization, which is a particular kind of adjustment of the vocal folds that has a characteristic effect, kind of like a little catch of some sort on a stop, and aspiration. He says these are phonological features that operate in associative sets of words involving sound imagery, and these are words like or sound or sensory imagery. So these are words like yampu, soft or smooth, yampui, to put sheets on a bed, sort of to smooth things out. Yuspa, this little apostrophe is marking the glottalization here. Lastai, to stretch out, again, sort of to smooth or flatten. So an initial stop, a compact vowel for flatness, an initial liquid, and for smoothness. And so the glottalization and aspiration and other phonic features combine to give the basic semantic unity revolving around a planar or regular two-dimensional surface, flatness or smoothness. And each word in the set has a glottalized consonant. That's what that apostrophe stands for, as well as other phonological features that characterize them. And he points out that there's one item, yushka, slippery, that has an aspirate. That's what the H is marking here, instead of this glottalized sound for, as he puts it, for etymological reasons. Now, interestingly, it shows a variant pronunciation, yushka, yushka, like that, with the glottalized sound instead of the aspirate. And he takes this as showing the characteristic ejective, that is glottalized consonant, in spite of its etymological source, in spite of the etymology that would give this the expected aspiration. So he calls this associative influence. I refer to it as phonic attraction, but it's an attraction that's based on the semantics, but has a phonic effect. So a kind of analogy that involves both sound and meaning coming together. So it isn't just English that did that, but and I think that, my sense is that we can find examples of this sort of all around the world. There are cases from Greek, which of course it's Greek, but I won't dwell on that. But I will talk about something that has been a subject of some controversy, because the neo-grammarians, if you remember what I was telling you about the neo-grammarians' insistence on the phonetic basis of sound change, they specifically said that it's not just that there's a phonetic basis to sound change, but the only kind of conditioning that you find with sound change is phonetic in nature. And in particular, there's no, in their terms, no grammatical conditioning of sound change, no non-phonetic conditioning of sound change. And this has become somewhat of a controversy, because there are some linguists like Raimo Antila who points to examples like this in Russian, where final palatal consonants become plain consonants in Russian only in inflectional endings. So it's not, so in order to distinguish between golubye with a palatal B, meaning pigeon, where at an earlier stage, which retains the palatalization in the later stage, golubye, the damye, the word for I give, had a palatal or palatalized M in earlier Russian and ends up as a plain M, unpalatalized in later Russian. So golubye, damye become golubye, dam. And the way Antila describes, he says this M here is an inflectional ending, and this B here is part of the stem, so that for him this is a sound change, yes, but it's a sound change that is tied to a particular grammatical category, and therefore would not qualify as would not be a well formed kind of sound change from the neo-grammarian point of view. Hans Henrik Hock, who, if you saw that message that I sent you last night, will be giving a guest lecture in my Indo-European class a week from today, which you're all welcome to go to. And Hock, this is the Hans Hock of the textbook that you guys have looked at. He says that the inflectional endings never alternate, that they're always, there's nothing else, there's no allomorphy with the inflectional endings. But the stem final consonants, such as the bya of golubye, show alternations between occurring in word final position, like in the nominative here, and occurring in medial position in the middle of a word, for instance, in the genitive golubya of a pigeon. So what he suggests then, consistent with the neo-grammarian view of things, is to say that actually the depalatalization operated on all word final consonants, or actually all labials at least. So that in the word for pigeon, golubye nominative, golubya genitive became golub plain B, genitive golubya with the palatalized B. But the word, a word like dam with an inflectional ending where there was no alternation, there was only that one form, ends up as dam. So that gives, so the alternation then between golub and golubya in the as a result of this regular sound change from in Hock's account gives the basis for analogical leveling. And what Hock claims has happened is that the bya, the palatal b of the genitive, was analogically extended into the nominative, giving golubya, golubya. So again, so this is a type of cycling where it returns to the original uniform paradigm of a palatal throughout. But in Hock's account, there was this intermediate stage where there was alternation between b and bya. And he justifies this by saying that there are actually Russian dialects and related languages like the Ukrainian, for instance, where the b of the nominative is generalized. So in Ukrainian, the related paradigm is holub, holuba, with a plain b, and that would be like the you remember what we talked about with spouses for spouses and such instances where you have the different directionality in leveling. And so the difference then between Russian and Ukrainian with regard to this paradigm is that Russian generalized the bya of the genitive at the expense of golub in the nominative, and Ukrainian generalized the nominative b, the plain b, at the expense of the palatal in the genitive. So this is by way of saying that we can actually there are cases that have been proposed as challenges to the neo-grammarian view of regular phonetically conditioned sound change and the workings of analogy, but it's possible to construct accounts that are consistent with the neo-grammarian approach that rely just on phonetically conditioned sound change and analogy, and therefore we don't really need to have grammatical conditioning. So this is a way of sort of vindicating or confirming the neo-grammarian position on things. So I'll stop at that point. I think that's about. Oh, I never did the French. We'll look at the French next time, and also in the context of the assignment you do for Monday, and I will grade the French problem, so you'll have that to look at and to guide you. But anyway, okay, so that's it. I don't see any questions or puzzled looks or anything of the sort, so I will bid you farewell and see you then next Monday. Okay, well, take care, everyone.
Thank you.
Okay, bye-bye.